for our final story for this edition of the Rolling Stone. This story is really apropos, seeing as I'm recording all these on February 12th, which is Abraham Lincoln's birthday, his 212th, as a matter of fact. So, you might have heard that the San Francisco School District is being even more insane than usual, because the San Francisco School District, the San Francisco Board of Education voted 6-1 to change the names of 44 schools. Okay, full stop. No one is actually going to these schools right now because San Francisco has closed all of its schools because of the never-ending pandemic. Thank you, Chairman Xi, for that again. And they don't know when these schools are going to reopen, but 44 schools were renamed. Some of the names of these schools: Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. In fact, Dianne Feinstein, her name was erased from one of these schools. And the New Yorker, Isaac Chotiner, I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly, Isaac Chotiner conducted an interview with the head of the board, the head of the San Francisco Board of Education, Gabriela Lopez, okay? And this was published in the New Yorker. Gabriela Lopez, let me just say it up front, she's 30 years old. She was elected in 2018. Now, I don't know exactly when in 2018 that she was elected, but I do know that, you know, since 2018 was 3 years ago at some time today, she was either 27 or 28 when she was elected as president. She was elected to head the San Francisco Board of Education. And we're talking not the Board of Education of, Smallville, Kansas. San Francisco, one of the major metropoli of our country, okay? 27, 28 years old. Now, you might be thinking, well, Nate, that doesn't have anything to do with it. If she was capable, she was capable. I would agree, gang, but we're going to get into some of the specifics of this interview. I mean, I could just read the interview verbatim, but I'm not going to do that because that would be too long and that would be too boring for you, and I think I'd give myself a heart attack, honestly, from reading all of this. So let me just read some bits and pieces about it, okay? So, Isaac Chotiner asks her, towards the beginning of the interview, "You're talking about the learning of history and its importance. Did the committee want historians to testify, and why or why not?" Lopez answers, "So it's hard for me to answer that question without just pointing to committee statements that they did not want to include historians. I think that's not the process that they created. They included a diverse set of community members, people with a set of experiences that contribute to these discussions, people from different backgrounds who are also educated in their own rights. So I think that was the makeup of the committee." Now, first and foremost, let me just say that you do not need to be a professional historian, by which I mean someone with a PhD in history, in order to make historical judgments. We didn't even used to do that. There didn't used to be, in the 18th century, there weren't even such things really as professional historians. Case in point, one of the very first histories of the American Revolutions that was actually written was by a woman named Mercy Otis Warren. And she was the sister of James Otis, who was a hero of John Adams and who actually argued against writs of assistance. James Otis did. Mercy Otis Warren was not a professional historian. She didn't go to college and get a degree in history or anything. She simply wrote a history of the American Revolution. Someone contemporary to that would be David McCullough, who's won the Pulitzer Prize twice, actually, for his books in 1993, I think, 91 or 93 for his biography of Harry Truman, and then again, of course, in 2001 for his superb biography of John Adams, which I highly, highly recommend you read. And if you've already have read it, I would recommend that you read it again because it is that good. So you don't have to be a professional historian to make historical judgments. However, by saying that these people are obviously qualified for the job of deciding which school should be renamed, which historical figures should be erased from these schools' fronts, from the faces of these schools. By saying that they're qualified just because they're a diverse set of community leaders with a set of experiences that contribute to these discussions, what does that even mean? Furthermore, okay, I'm going to guess that when she says that we have a diverse set of community members, she's saying that we have Asian people, we have Black people, we have Hispanic people. Well, okay. Does that magically mean now that you have insights into history that are not available to anyone else? Is that what we're saying? Are we saying now that you are so far beyond removed from the rest of the human race that you have that superpower? Are we also not making an assumption that, oh, if you are a certain color, you must have these set of experiences, which means that, you would be able to have that superpower? Is that really what we're saying? That seems to be the track that we're going on. That seems to be the track that we're on. And what makes it even worse is that this committee, this diverse set of community leaders that Lopez praises to the sky, got some fundamental history wrong. For people who are supposed to be educated who are diverse and who are educated in their own rights, as she says, these people, did not do their research. So, for example, one of the schools that they renamed was originally named after Paul Revere, the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. They took his name out because they said that Paul Revere was part of the Penobscot expedition, which they said was done to steal land from Native Americans, from Indians over in the Massachusetts area. But as Isaac Chotiner points out, the Penobscot expedition wasn't about the colonization of Indian lands. So they got that wrong. He has some other examples. They got rid of one of the schools was named after James Russell Lowell, who was a poet and essayist in the 19th century. They got rid of him because they said that he was a racist, didn't like Black people. He was dead set against suffrage for Black individuals, didn't want them to have the vote. Isaac Chotiner again says that James Russell Lowell was actually in favor of Black suffrage. Or get this, another school was named after businessman James Lick. His name was ordered removed from the school because his foundation funded an installation that didn't go up until almost 2 decades after he died. So they're blaming a guy who had been dead 20 years for something that his foundation did. And he Isaac Chotiner point blank asks Gabriela Lopez, that's not something you're concerned about? And this is what she says. No. I wouldn't phrase it that way either. I think it would just require more dialogue. I know the committee is still meeting, and they're still open to that. So it's not that it's not a concern. I think it's something that's missing without a dialogue. But what the what? I think it's something that's missing without a dialogue? What the hell is she even talking about, gang? That's not an answer. She's trying to dance around the topic. She is admitting that she is perfectly fine with this so-called committee, this committee of ideological purity, because let's just be honest here. That is what this is. she goes on in this interview to say that we're not erasing history, we're not trying to rewrite history, we're just deciding where the limelight is going to be focused. So instead of these people, like Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Paul Revere, people like that, we're going to focus on other people who have been forgotten, who, again, though, from their point of view, have done much more than these other losers like Washington and Lincoln. Because don't you know, Washington was a slave owner. Don't you know, Lincoln had some, what we would call, yes, racist attitudes towards black people, which back then in the 19th century, 160 years ago, were actually pretty mainstream. Now, we can say, guys, you know what, that wasn't good, you know. we know better now. We have actually advanced in that particular regard. Thank God for that. But to blame someone for thinking how his society thought, okay, and blaming all the blame on him, and then saying that he is without honor in his own country, that is taking it an extra step. This is, of course, they can pretty it up, they can gussy it up by saying, oh, we're just choosing to elevate certain people. This is about rewriting history. This is about rewriting history, because when you pick and choose, okay, whose statues get to go up, when you pick and choose whose name gets to be put on the front of schools, which people, in other words, get to be honored in public, you're saying something about who are the heroes, who are the villains. Because now, kids are only going to be introduced to people like Washington and Revere and Lincoln and all the rest of these great historical figures by what their textbooks say. And we've already seen, look at the 1619 Project, which is already being implemented in public schools, or it was until the pandemic kind of put a stop to that. There is a silver lining even in the worst things, gang, which says that, again, slavery, racial oppression, white supremacy, those are the cornerstones. Those are the pillars of the United States of America. Nothing else. It can all be reduced to that. This is about rewriting history. Never let them, never, ever, ever let them tell you otherwise. And it gets even better, gang. It gets even better. Because Isaac Chotiner, he asks Gabriela Lopez, he asks her point blank what she thinks about Lincoln. He says, I think a lot of the commentary about the school names is focused specifically on Lincoln. It seems to be the thing that a lot of people are the most upset about. Do you have any thoughts about Lincoln and how we should view him? She answers, I think that the killing of indigenous peoples and that record is something that is not acknowledged. It's something that people are now learning about and due to this process. And so we don't have to do the work of that extra learning when we're having and so we just have to do the work of that extra learning when we're having these discussions. He continues, but beyond that, anything else? I'm curious how you view him generally. And this is how she answers. I think Lincoln gets more praise than the, how can I say this? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that Lincoln is not someone that I typically tend to admire or see as a hero because of these specific instances where he has contributed to the pain of the decimation of people. That's not something that I want to ignore. It's something that I'm learning about and that I know it's not often spoken about. First place, of course it's well spoken about. Hardly anyone can now talk about Lincoln without getting all of the yes. He held some, what were back then very mainstream, but honestly, racist ideas about black people. Yes, you know what? He actually did. You know, he ordered, I think, the execution of 38 Dakota Indians because there was an uprising in 1862 at the height of the Civil War. Interestingly, though, about that, the governor of Minnesota had actually rounded up, because of that uprising, the governor of Minnesota had actually rounded up, it was like 200 tribal leaders, 200 Dakota Indians were going to swing for that uprising. Lincoln intervened in that situation when he didn't have to, and he pardoned the vast majority of them so that only 38 people were hanged. Now, you can still say that that was terrible too, but it's not as if Lincoln was going about there, gleefully rubbing his hands that 200 Dakota Indians had been killed. So even that idea is getting shrouded in the ideology of the left. It's being actively pushed back into the darkness by leftist ideology. And then the sheer, how do I put this, gang? The sheer arrogance of someone like Gabriela Lopez, who has done absolutely nothing with her life. Okay, she's the head of San Francisco's Board of Education at a very young age. Gesundheit. What does she do? She oversees the massacring of history by renaming 44 schools. When instead the San Francisco school districts should be asking, how are they going to get the kids back in the classroom? Seeing as how, that's what the school district exists for. I am not a proponent of public education. I have said before here on this channel that the entire thing needs to be burned to the ground. But it seems to me that if you work for a school district in any sort of capacity, the number one question on your mind right now should be, how do you actually do your job and educate the kids by which you are paid to do from the public purse? How do you do that instead of, talking about, well, should Abraham Lincoln's name really be on this school? What about James, what about James Lewis? What about this people over here? What about Paul Revere over here? Who cares at this point in time? I mean, in all practical purposes, I care because I care about history, because I see and you see what's happening, that this is a rewriting of history. But for someone like that, to get back on point here for just a second, gang, for someone like Gabriela Lopez, who again has done nothing but be elected to the Board of Education for San Francisco, to say that she doesn't see Abraham Lincoln as a hero, to basically say that she doesn't admire him for anything that he's done, not for even emancipating the slaves, for emancipating them, for plugging on with the Civil War, which is the reason why emancipation happened, which is the reason why the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments to the Constitution were added. It is a brazen admittance of arrogant ignorance. And if I wanted to wrap this whole story in a bow, I will link this in the description box, because this is just something that needs to be read to be believed, gang. I tell you what, I haven't even probably touched a sixth of what happened in this interview, but these are the people who are now running the public education system in this country. The public education system is filled to the brim with Gabriela Lopez's. And that is why I have said that the entire system needs to be burned to the ground. Because at this point, when you have someone like this in charge of a board of education, there's no reasoning with these sorts of people. You can't rationalize with them. You can't argue with them. You cannot, as Socrates said, reason together with them. Not because they don't have the capacity to reason. I'm not saying that. They're humans, so of course, they're rational substances. But they haven't just drunk the Kool-Aid. They have gone down into the barrel and have pickled themselves in the Kool-Aid. That is how warped their minds have become with the ideology. And yes, you can still try to win them back over, save them from the dark side, try to be Luke Skywalker to their Vader. But at the same time, that takes too long in this case. And meanwhile, children are being just ground in the gears of the system, of the machine, and they are being propagated day after day after day after day after day, whether they're actually in a physical classroom or whether they're being educated digitally via Zoom or whatever app the school districts have chosen to use. This is why I say that it is imperative for conservatives to understand that the fight has moved on beyond school choice and homeschooling. Yes, school choice is great. I am all for homeschooling, absolutely. But the end goal can't simply be making more room for those two options. We need to destroy the entire system so that people like Gabriela Lopez aren't in charge of your children's education, so that they cannot propagate them into hating their own country by giving them this warped, ideologically infused version of what they wish history was like instead of what it actually was. Whew. And on that note, gang, I am going to wrap things up. So, as always, stay safe, stay free, and stay warm. Again, if you live in the Midwest or in the East. Take care, gang, and I will chat at you all later. Ciao.